Welcome to Coffee Chat with Chen. My name is Chen Ganesharaja and I'm the Managing Principal at WealthBridge. Every month, we sit down with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and industry experts talking about all things investing, but especially how to build, preserve, and transfer your wealth in a tax-efficient manner. If you're an entrepreneur, investor, or an individual looking to secure your financial future, this podcast is absolutely for you. So grab a coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about strategies that create lasting legacies. Welcome to the conversation. We have a very special guest here today. Meet Pri Uthayakumar, who's an engineer with over 12 years of experience in asset management, strategic planning, and project management. As a certified project management professional, he combines technical expertise with business strategy to drive success both in his career and his entrepreneurial ventures. Pri specializes in real estate investing and business operations, managing a diverse portfolio focused on multifamily housing and alternative real assets. He's a managing partner at Lu Ventures, a private real estate firm in Ontario, Canada that invests in needs-based assets. His experience spans in residential multifamily properties, assisted living, student housing, and self-storage. Pri, welcome to the show.
Chen, it's a pleasure to be here.
Pri, talk to us a little bit about what you do. Talk to us a little bit about you.
I will, but before I get started, I want to say congratulations to you and the team on the opening of this office.
Thank you.
This space is fantastic.
Amazing.
It looks
Thank
great.
you.
A little bit about myself. So, of course, Pri Uthayakumar, I'm a husband first, so I've been married to my high school sweetheart for over 8 years now. I should keep track of that. And then I'm a father of two as well. In terms of my background, really appreciate the context and bio there. I have a technical background in engineering.
Amazing.
That's really what I completed, and back in my mind, I've always wanted to pursue a career there, and that's I pursued a career in engineering where I can apply my skill sets. But a lot of what I've sort of realized while being in that space is wanting to be an entrepreneur.
Okay.
Yeah, at the same time, and I've always tried things of different magnitude, and I've always felt comfortable doing that. And then Lu Ventures was formed about four or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And it's with my business partner who's a friend, a close friend.
Good.
We went to school together, and really there was lots of synergies in what we were able to think about in terms of what we wanted to do as a business, and really we ended up focusing on the real estate space.
Okay.
Something we enjoy. Acquired value-add assets.
Okay.
Value-add, essentially, we can get into it a little bit more, but acquired value-add assets where we can build wealth for the long term. Yeah. And as of more recently, entered into the assisted living space.
Amazing. Yeah. So you definitely talked about, a broad scope of what obviously Lu Ventures does. Tell me a little bit about Lu Ventures, just, in terms of history. And you really, you started off in the engineering and a very technical space and then sort of jumped into multifamily investing, and then of course now some of the alternative asset classes. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about why and what the story behind that.
Yeah, for sure. There's lots of synergies at the end of the day. So even with engineering, my career was focused on asset management, capital planning and delivery. Okay. Right. So it's at the end of the day it was infrastructure projects that I focused on. There's fleet-based projects as well, but as well as infrastructure projects. Got it. And real estate just made sense. Okay. Right? And I'm able to apply a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis and bring that over to the business side, right? And it sort of just came about. Okay. I sort of took a traditional path normally, which was like, hey, my dad always told me, purchase land, it'll always hold value. We can't make any more land at the end of the day. Of course. And manage it, hold it for the long term, and you'll be fine, right? Yeah. He made that work as a blue collar worker, and maybe I'll give you a little bit of background as well,
sure,
or story here. Yeah. We lived in Scarborough. We purchased a bungalow house at the time, and then the bungalow next door came up for sale, and we would have never thought about purchasing a second property. But for some reason, my dad was like, we can do this, and he ended up purchasing the second property. Back then, maybe financing was a little bit easier to manage as well. But we had conversations where like, how are we going to manage this property? Yeah. And he's like, listen, let's rough it out for the next little while and it'll work out over the long term.
Yeah.
10 years later, like we had to jump in right away as the property managers for those properties. So myself to start, and then my siblings as they got a little bit older as well. And we learned all about property management just with our own properties, managing our own personal portfolio. And then those are the properties where we're able to leverage the equity from in order to grow and acquire other assets in the future, right? So that was our foundation.
Amazing.
And what my dad was able to instill was like purchase, hold for the long term, make sure it makes sense. We didn't get into the numbers and things at that time because we never really understood it, but we just knew, you know, you can make something work.
Yeah.
We apply a lot of the same principles still for Lou Ventures,
Yeah.
but just at a grander scale.
Yeah.
And so between my business partner and I bring a lot of the asset management experience.
Sure.
My business partner brings in a lot of the operational
Okay.
experience, and we use that together in acquiring value add assets. And value add assets is where we know we have a bit more control in assessing what that asset looks like, what the future potential of that asset is, and then can we recycle the equity that's been gained from our operational experience or operational the plan we execute ultimately to build equity in the properties and then recycle them into
Amazing.
future wealth.
Hey, I'll actually first off, just acknowledge the one important thing that you said, which obviously resonates with a lot of people in our community, which is really the resiliency of your dad and really as an immigrant coming into this country and then wanting to build everything, but more importantly, hey, not being afraid of certain uncertainties that comes this way, and it's not easy to wanting to acquire multiple properties and that kind of stuff, especially when you're new to the country or you're building in this new country. But of course, it actually teaches you very valuable lessons, right? Which is one, hey, the importance of acquiring, different types of assets, including real estate. But more importantly, you also learn a little bit of a strategy, whether it's buy and hold. I know there's a ton of things out there in terms of burst strategies, etc. But in principle, buying, holding it, refining when the property appreciates, and then using that type of equity or the money that came out of that property to be able to essentially purchase additional properties, right?
For sure.
So on that context, because I'm always curious. So fundamentally, we talked about single-family residential properties as we just talked about a very basic example of how do you grow wealth within that. And then you now are obviously operating, if I'm not mistaken, an assisted living facility.
That's right.
We talked about, how do you sort of figure out efficiencies within, that type of deal. But more importantly, and I know you and I spoke about it, in single-family residential, we are always waiting for the market to do its thing in terms of like growing value in a property, versus in a multifamily property or even in an assisted living facility, where really an alternative asset class. But one of the biggest benefit that you have is you are able to, as you operate that property as a business, you're able to find efficiencies to be able to increase the net operating income or the income of that property.
Yep.
But when people think about multifamily properties or assisted living facilities, it's a big deal because it's a large property or it's a large deal. So people often think it's very different or it's very scary to sort of jump into these types of deals. But what sort of, I get, like, what got you over the hump to think about, thinking bigger and getting into these bigger deals rather than just staying within single-family residential?
Yeah, a great question. Being exposed to understanding that there's a market outside of single-family, it's not as complicated as we think it is. So I want to say it's not easy, right? It's not easy at the end of the day, but once you understand sort of the key elements of what it requires when you essentially enter the commercial space, and commercial is, even in multifamily, it's 5 units and greater. When you enter that space, what is possible, right? And in the commercial space, everything is very much treated as a business versus what you personally can qualify for, or debt service. So now, if you're familiar with sort of the mortgage and financing world, TDS, GDS is not really considered, which is your total debt servicing and gross debt servicing. But and your personal net worth matters, but your personal income not so much. And and so once we realized that now it's based off of the asset and how the asset operates in commercial, that checked off a huge box. Second, the ability to scale comes from acquiring commercial properties, not as much the residential, because the residential has its own criteria and own set of limitations on what financing looks like, right? So that's what got us into the commercial space, and when I say knowledge, it's being exposed to a network of individuals that you got to put yourself in these spaces. You got to get uncomfortable sometimes, but when you realize people just like you are doing these things, then you're like, okay, there's an opportunity here, and there's always room for collaboration at the end of the day, because each individual can bring a different set of skill sets to this business, because at the end of the day, there's opportunity in what you can do across each of the facets, and that just sort of got us going. It's like, okay, let's connect with the folks. Let's see what we need to do ultimately to assess markets, to understand how we can build a deal flow, how we can analyze the deal, how we can go through due diligence, how we can set up financing, how we can set up operations, and then what can we do to actually end up increasing the NOI, and then ultimately stabilize the property and exit, right? Potentially exit as well. And an exit could be stabilization and pulling some money out of that property, and then being able to reinvest that.
No, I think it's very important what you said, right? Like, first of all, the most important thing is, I think when you said knowledge, and I know there's always a saying out there, knowledge is power, but I always say knowledge is really power if you can do something about it, or do something with it at the end of the day, right? So one of the great things that I am obviously seeing from this is like, hey, one thing is, the information is out there. It's how bad you want to learn that information, and then of course, I'm always a believer, like, when you move away from a single family residential type property and now you're getting into a business operation as part of the process, it is a team sport to some extent, right? And I think you alluded to that before, which is you bring in the asset management experience, but your partner brings in the operational experience. And very similar to that, there are people who can bring in investment or financing type, a specialty into the mix, because everybody can bring in a different part of the puzzle in order to make something work. So on that note, so obviously you just, I believe you went through 6 points, which are like, hey, or 6 or 7 points, in terms of how to make some of these things work. I would love to, just because I know the subject matter, when it comes to assisted living facilities or even multifamily investing, is relatively new for a lot of people, a lot of our viewers per se, at least. So I would love to kind of just pick your brain just a little bit of, like, one, where do you look for these types of deals? Like, that's one thing. And then also, like, how do you sort of analyze some of these deals? I mean, I get we can't get into super technical, but just really at a very high level, like, how do you, like, because I know sometimes given the market conditions, interest rates, et cetera, like, people always say there's no deals available out there, or it's not working. Where do you find it? How do you sort of put yourself in positions where you can collaborate with others? And then we'll definitely get into, like, how do you sort of analyze some of these deals, just really at a very high level, at least to start that introductory topic for sure.
Sure, for sure. Like I said before, I think one of the key things we look for is building a network. So part of building a network would be, can we connect with realtors and brokers who are very well specialized in the space that you're looking for? One of the things we learned very early on is we have to be very specific about what we're looking for. So for example, we're looking for a 10 to 15 unit building that is within a particular price range, that's in a particular area within the market, because you can have a market and it could be Toronto, for example, right? But within Toronto, there are multiple pockets, right? And you have to be specific about what you're looking for and why. So, like, the knowledge you gain through market research will ultimately dictate what you then relay to your network. And it's typically called a power team, but you don't get a power team until you build a relationship. So what you would essentially relay to your network. And what you want is, when that person sees a 12-unit building that's within that area, within that price range, and the rest of the criteria that you mentioned, they think about you first.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
Because if you just say, I'm looking for a multifamily building, I don't know how much, what my budget is, and I'm not really particular about the size, and it can be in any market, you're now 95% of the folks that are possibly sharing that information, right? So you want to be top of mind for again, that experienced individual who's going to be thinking about you when you.
Sure.
So we found that to be the most effective.
Okay.
And again, it depends, right? There are some folks who go find the deal themselves.
Okay.
So, there's lots of other terms out there, but like, you might choose to do your own marketing.
Yeah.
You might choose to reach out to your sellers directly.
Sure.
There's many different ways to do that.
Yeah.
But we found, based off of how we currently operate, the most effective way is to leverage the expertise of people in that particular space.
Yeah. So really forming that power team, and to your point, I guess the power team really gets formed when you either do work relationships or deals at the end of the day. But but really, if I was to just, I guess, pick your brain, like before you even got into your first deal, let's say anything aside from a single family residential, like how were you able to find that first deal when you didn't necessarily have a relationship with people per se? Like what were maybe 2 things or 3 things that you did consistently before you found out that, hey, here's the deal, here's something that I want to get into?
For sure. Are you talking about in the commercial space?
In the commercial space,
Yeah,
correct.
in the commercial space.
Yeah.
We tended to be very more specific about what we wanted.
Okay.
And if deals were brought to us, we would provide rapid feedback.
Okay.
So we would look at it.
Yeah.
We'd say, okay, here's the information we need.
Yeah.
If it was missing, so for example, financials.
Yeah.
We look at the financials. We say, okay, we need additional information,
Yeah.
or hey, it doesn't fit our criteria.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
And then just provide the rapid feedback.
Yeah.
I think most times, like, you don't want to waste the time of the team on the other side either. If they're sharing something with you, if you can give the feedback, then you've closed that loop, and then they'll bring something else to you.
Got it.
It's not like we did that perfectly. It's sort of a learning experience as we go through. But relationships matter to us. Yeah. That's sort of how, when these deals came forward, we were able to sort of leverage that relationship to say, okay, we're ready to go. Let's go in and put in an offer. And I have lots of different stories about how some of these things ended up playing out. Yeah. But I think I can tell you safely, I don't remember the last time we've actually put in an offer and not closed on a property.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So if we're going to put in an offer,
that speaks to the volume of the due diligence you do before you just jump into putting an offer, etc. Right? Like so really, what I am gauging is the bottom line is how to analyze that property or underwrite that property like at a very high level. I guess napkin type underwriting. There are strategies and things that you can learn. It's out there in the internet. There's lots of other people in the multifamily space or commercial real estate space who might be able to teach that to if you're new into this space. Bottom line is you should be able to learn that kind of stuff, and of course some of that comes with experience, but some of that comes with wanting to proactively underwrite a deal when it comes your way. And you need to be able to learn that and quickly make decisions to see, again, based on the market segments that you want to invest in, based on the criteria that you want to invest in, if this actually makes sense for you, at the end of the day, right? So bottom line is learning some of that would be a good step. Again, knowledge is out there. It's just a matter of actually going out, learning. ChatGPT to everything else. AI will probably do a lot of work for, do wonders in this kind of market. But really understanding that space and then proactively learning just how to underwrite deals would be probably a good start, if I may say.
100%.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to learn by yourself.
Yeah.
Right? The first deal that we had done in sort of this proving out the concept of we wanted to understand how the BRRRR would work, and we sort of framed that as value add today. The first deal we had done in that space as it relates to a BRRRR was a joint venture.
Okay.
So we were the capital partners, and we had an operating partner that then brought the deal forward, had already done the due diligence, and then showed us the pro forma in terms of how we would ultimately perform. Okay. And for us, yes, we were getting knowledge through podcasts and folks we were connecting with, but it was just we were quick to take action in, we pay dollars for tuition today. That was our way of paying dollars for tuition, but directly
of course.
with an operating partner where we'd say, hey, look, we want to learn the process from beginning to end with you. Yeah. Right?
Exactly.
Get connected in that space. We went out and really sort of saw, okay, what are some of the things that they're looking for, work with the contractor, build those relationships. Yeah. And they had no problem sort of, doing that. That was our way of learning, right? And that's where a lot of times folks will have concerns about what they don't know. Yeah. And if you've then potentially partnered with someone who does know, who has done things in that space.
Sure.
Now you're learning with them.
Yeah.
And you can continue to build with them, or you can choose to go out and do it yourself as well. But at least now you've started to answer some of those questions about what you don't know, because it's going to come up during the project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So really, from a power team perspective, there's many different angles that you can play as an investor or a partner in that team, and that's really, you can either be the person who brings in the capital if you want. You might be able to bring in deals, or you might be able to find deals, etc., and then you might be able to do that. You might be managing the asset. That could be one thing that from a finance perspective, or you can actually operate the asset, right? Like, so in your case, you said, hey, and a lot of times people don't necessarily always think. They may have money, but they may not know how to do something, so they don't take any actions at all, or vice versa. They may be willing to do all the work in terms of operating, managing the asset, but they may not necessarily have capital, so they may think that they may not be able to do anything at all, but that's not true.
That's not true.
If you have one piece of the puzzle, it's very possible that you should be collaborating with others who might be able to bring some of the missing piece of the puzzle to make a deal work at the end of the day.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%. And it's an important sort of learning experience. I guess what we don't realize is there's tons of collaboration that happens at the highest of highest levels. Right? And we just don't realize it.
Yeah.
And only if we start thinking that there's exponential opportunities that it allows us to say, like, collaboration would take us to that goal sooner than we'd expect.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So Pri, let's jump right into the assisted living facility.
Sure.
Just because I know we talked about, so I know we said, hey, we've done a little bit of single family residential. We dabbled, if I'm not mistaken, I know you've had cottage properties, and then of course multifamily, which is apartment buildings, 5 units, 10 units, 12 units. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, just, very important for people to understand, is anything more than 5 units from a multifamily property, it is considered a commercial property. So you may think you may not have enough income to be able to qualify for that property from a personal income perspective, but that's not always true, because then that becomes a commercial property where underwriting guidelines are obviously different, and it's based on what the property is essentially able to bring in from an income perspective,
100%.
and you may qualify for that property. So it's important for people to know that as well.
Yeah.
And then of course
the property will qualify.
Yeah.
You can then purchase that
Got
property, right? Because the property's income expense statement at the end of the day. How the property operates is what will end up allowing you to qualify.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily based on your personal income versus your debts. It's more so based on if the property is able to bring in sufficient income to be able to operate itself on a cash flow basis. Perfect.
For sure.
So that being said, let's jump right into the assisted living facility. Tell us a little bit about your assisted living facility.
Okay.
One, how did you get into that space? Why did you get into that space?
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of go from there.
That's perfect. By accident.
Amazing.
That's what ended up happening. I can tell you, so my partner Dusan and I, where we focused was multifamily residential, and we thought that's the space we were going to grow in, because it made the most sense for us. We were looking for value adds, and value adds is what we essentially thrived in. One of the things, if you remember, just around 2022, 2023, the market started getting really interesting, meaning everyone was buying everything just because of the cost of debt was so low.
Cheap.
Yeah, very cheap. We'd like to think we're pretty disciplined when it comes to looking at the financials and only making a decision accordingly, and building conditions and things of that nature. We could not make sense of any projects that were presented to us. And what that meant was we needed to start looking at something else.
Okay.
One of the things we talked about is okay, this is great from a long-term wealth building perspective as well, but we need some more cash flow opportunities within our business.
Sure.
And we wanted to operate a business rather than sort of traditional thought process on businesses. We're like, okay, business, but if it's backed by real estate, if we own the underlying asset as well, we can always fall back on the real estate because we understood the real estate piece. When we were sort of talking to people in our network about it, retirement homes and assisted living sort of came up as an opportunity.
Okay.
And so we're like, okay, let's look into it. Started looking at different homes in Ontario, so from Ottawa to the east end in North Belleville, all the way to the west in Windsor. There was a property that came up off market. So these type of projects or properties don't transact typically in the open market.
Okay.
They're very much off market. So again, the power team and the relationships is
Yeah.
important here. They need to know that, you're qualified buyers who have some level of operational experience that can close on these properties.
Sure.
That typically comes up.
Yeah.
And the property we currently own is a 130-bed assisted living facility in Windsor.
Amazing.
We have different types of accommodation ultimately, but it's primarily geared towards low-income individuals
Okay.
who need permanent housing with some levels of supports and care services.
Okay.
In that space, there's sort of a continuum
Okay.
of what care looks like
Okay.
and what housing looks like for in the assisted living space, we'll call it,
Okay.
from like shelters to transitional housing to supportive housing to assisted living,
Got it.
somewhere in there to retirement homes that we know and long-term cares or
Gotcha.
nursing homes
Yeah.
that's typically mentioned. Ours falls between the supportive housing and assisted living space just because of who we house,
Sure.
what type of care we offer and
Sure.
things of that nature.
Sure.